GM friends, and welcome to the Metacast Crypto Corner brought to you by Naavik. I'm your host, Nico Vereecke, and today I'm joined by Quinn Campbell, who's the VP of Growth at Sky Mavis, and Jon Hook, who's an active advisor and investor and CMO at PlayEmber. And so today's episode was kind of inspired by my experience talking to teams building ambitious mobile Web3 games. And they all claim that we will bring the masses to Web3 gaming. But when I asked them exactly on how they plan on reaching their target players, they don't really have a good answer. And so the goal of today's episode is to discuss the intricacies of growth and UA and marketing in a Web3 world. And so, we have two perfect guests for that today. But before we kick off our conversation, let's get to know each other a little bit. Quinn, you want to talk about your trajectory in games and what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Nico. Excited to be here today. So, before my time with Sky Mavis, I actually spent maybe almost 2 years in mobile games publishing, hyper casual specifically, right? And I really kind of enjoyed that role. I think what's so fun about hyper casual is most of the devs that you're working with are like 24-year-old kids in their mom's basement. And it is their absolute dream to ship a game. So basically every time that I would launch a game as a publishing manager, I was making somebody's dream come true. And that was the coolest thing, right? But about like 8 or 9 months into my time in hyper casual, I started taking a closer look at all of our publishing contracts. And I realized that on every game that we shipped, we as the middleman, as the publisher, would co-opt like 80% of the revenue off of that game. And the game dev who ideated, built, and shipped their game was taking home like 20% of their revenue. And I was just immediately disenchanted with really like traditional games publishing, right? It's not a knock on where I was. It's really just kind of a knock on the system that has sprung up. And so I, as a middleman, knew that it had to change. I knew there had to be something better out there. And so I started digging. It was right around that time I came across NFT gaming, right around the time I came across Axie Infinity and really Mavis Hub, which is kind of what we distribute through. And this idea of direct-to-community games distribution just clicked with me, and I knew I had to be part of it.
Fantastic. Let's remember the Sky Mavis Hub or the Mavis Hub. I'm interested to learn more.
Cool.
But before that, Jon, you want to tell us about you?
Yeah, sure. It's great to have another hyper-casual groupie on the podcast, Quinn. My background, I started off ad agency side, making ads for like entertainment brands, sports brands, retail brands. And it was in the early days of mobile where there were just WAP sites and those weird crazy frog ringtones. And a really good friend of mine and I were at Mobile World Congress, had too much tapas and sangria and thought, well, how hard can it be to start your own mobile ad network? So we did, like at my mum's kitchen table. So built that from scratch, sold that to Funware listed on the NASDAQ. And that really just threw me into the whole sort of mobile ecosystem. Then spent some time running Ad Colony in Europe. So, very big gaming video SDK, got bought by Digital Turbine. Then had a pleasure working alongside the founders of Oma Games in Paris for a couple of years, building out, Oma Games, one of the top hyper casual publishers. So I don't disagree with anything Quinn said. It's just the business model of heavily, ad-based games distribution. And then spent a couple of great years at Boombit. On lockdown, building out their publishing division, and that's really where I met the founder of the project I'm now working on at PlayEmber, and we can get into that in a bit. And then outside of that, like you said, Nico, just a huge fan of just everyone in gaming. I think this Web3 trait of everyone helping each other is a Web2 gaming trait. So I've got a really fun portfolio of investments in gaming tech, game studios, gaming ad tech, and just like Web3, everyone hangs out in Discord and spaces, but the same in Web2. I've always just really valued the network and friendships and building there as well.
I'm always surprised when I'm at gaming events. I used to go to more financial Web3 events, and I often found it difficult to connect to people. And now I go to these gaming events, and if I don't know what to say, I'm like, what's your favorite game? And then, we can jam on that. So it's really easy to connect with people. So I fully agree. This is an amazing space. We talked a bit about, or both of you touched upon the business model of hyper casual publishing. Could you like go a bit deeper on that. I'd like to understand how you see that change in a Web3 world. And obviously, as part of that question, I'd like to understand your thoughts on, whether Web3 makes sense for the more hyper casual types of games. Quinn, you wanna start?
Can we kick that off? Yeah. So those are almost two separate questions, right? It's kind of one is what does publishing look like in Web3, and then two is it's almost like larger, is NFT gaming a fit for every genre or not, right? So on the publishing side gets really interesting because I think that there are so many projects right now that are using they want to be the Web3 games distributor, right? And selling block space right now is such a powerful thing. And so there are a lot of really awesome L1s and L2s who have all this block space to sell, and they're kind of optimized for gaming. And they'll certainly be a winner here.
Can you elaborate on selling block space?
Yeah. So basically having your own network, having a blockchain, and then kind of whitelisting developers to come build on your blockchain, right? I think selling block space is one of the, it is the oil of the next decade. It's probably the coolest asset to be selling right now. And so anybody who has block space to sell is in a really wonderful position. So ultimately, right, I think that's kind of the first layer of what it means to distribute. The other part is having a community because, it's almost launch paddy in an effect because you do have to distribute directly to your community. But it opens up all of these different avenues for how value is actually captured. For instance, you can distribute directly to a community. There's now asset sales, there's token sales in these third-party games that can be a part of the ecosystem. And so maybe that third-party dev is actually able to capture a lot of the token sales or secondary market sales off of the assets in their game. So there's a different kind of approach to it as opposed to just hey, we're going to run all the UA on your game and handle distribution and then take some large percent. As for the second question around hyper casual, I actually have kind of a theory, and I don't know if now is the right time to dive into it or if I should pass it over to Jon and then take it back afterwards. Nico, I'll let you decide.
I'll write it down. Hyper casual Web3, and then we can touch on that later. Because because I'd love to have Jon's thoughts as well. But first, I'd like to push back a bit on what you said, where I asked you about what do you mean with block space, and so you think, or you say that it's a big advantage if games publishers have actually a blockchain and the infrastructure for that. Me as many consider me a crypto bro, right? I'm decentralization is what we need, right? And so for me, that is kind of counterintuitive, right? I want, in an ideal world, to have all of the ecosystems open. And, if people come to me and ask me, where should I build? I think in the top 3 suggestions of ecosystems, there's always the ETH, ecosystem where, everything's open and you can bring your assets from one end, right? The ZK rollup all the way to whatever sidechain there is. Why are you so bullish on companies and publishers having their own block space control?
Yeah, it's a great pushback, right? And it's basically this spectrum, because absolutely having full decentralization and openness, not needing to be whitelisted in order to access that block space, which is what you get on ETH, right? That's powerful. But you also run these risks of obviously gas gets expensive, but even beyond that, right? What was it? Was it Polygon a while back that was crashed by this sunflower game? So correct. You end up, right. So you run this risk of where there could be block space that's kind of used inefficiently. And so if you go to a kind of a more closed chain where you do have to be whitelisted to build, you're not only kind of guaranteed a certain amount of efficient block space, but I think a lot of the packaging that we're seeing with BD around, hey, come build on our chain, is also this white glove service. Hey, this is a battle-tested chain, a battle-tested team. We can help you launch your game. And we're going to build specific infrastructure to support your needs. So it is a spectrum, and there's not a perfect answer to it.
Yes, I think that's fair. That's something I feel like we could probably do a whole episode about, because there's a lot of interesting things you just touched upon in your answer. But before that, I'd love to have Jon's thoughts, maybe not on, hyper casual and Web3, but more on, the initial question and the key differences in publishing and business models there, and how Web3 changes all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Quinn summarized at the start that the traditional hyper casual business model is exactly that. And I've talk about this a lot, is that developers love making games, but they are entering into each individual publisher's business model, and they define those levers of LTV and CPI that are based on their goals, right? So if you're pre-exit, it's not really about, it's not necessarily about EBITDA, it's about revenue, it's about chart position and reinvesting any margin you make back into growth so that you can, put all that nice marketing out there about, we've got this many downloads, worldwide hits, etc. So I think the publishing model in hyper casual is pretty comfortable from an investment perspective versus Web3, because you're dealing in things that you know to be true, right? It's very specific calculations early on where you don't need to build a community. You can make an early decision based on some hard and fast metrics that you have got 3, 4, 5 years worth of data to decide if that's going to get you to your goals, whether that's a 50 mil game, 100 mil revenue game. And of course, unlike Web3, you have centralized distribution, right? You have, two major app stores, of course, depending on the country, some, very helpful third-party app stores as well. But I think that is one of the, you can say it's a disadvantage, but I think in that classic publishing model, distribution is very set. Of course, with some of the sort of recent changes from Apple, some of that distribution has become a little bit more problematic in terms of the monetization of that, starting to hit people's, affecting eCPMs and therefore for bottom line. But I think, even now when we can get into that, I kind of see, I believe the next generation of publishing is going to come from, some of these companies I see raising now. The problem with the traditional Web2 publishers is they have that Web2 mindset and they're trying to basically reverse engineer Web3 publishing into what they know to be true in terms of Web2 that I think is going to be a bit of a challenge, both in terms of metrics, but also I think in terms of the development capacity of certain studios, depending on the game genre you make. I think it's a huge step up technically. So that's sort of my thoughts on the classic and still standing hyper casual distribution model.
I absolutely love that point you just made, Jon, about almost taking this like legacy mindset and trying to kind of apply it here in Web3. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term like skeuomorphic, right? Or skeuomorphism, right? But it's this idea of when a new tech comes along and we haven't quite figured it out yet. We just kind of copy paste our existing mental models. And like the greatest example is newspaper on the internet. When it first came out, they were literally just rebuilding the front page of the New York Times on the internet. And now obviously like it looks very different because we realize there's a more efficient kind of web native way to do it. And I think we're in this very skeuomorphic phase, specifically around games publishing right now. I don't think that there is actually an exact answer out yet. And I think that this winning model will be quite different than anything that we're used to, but it's just kind of beyond the event horizon right now. So we can't quite see it yet.
Yeah, I think, and for me, that was really interesting. Obviously, listening, you've made that jump sort of from hyper casual now to one of the leaders and innovators in Web3, and I love how your mind is already on needing your own, you're almost your own blockchain. Versus when I look at the current approach of all these sort of other Web2s, it's just natural in that walk, crawl, run sort of mentality that you all sort of basically find your home with that initial N1 and just build around that whilst you figure out and learn. Because for me, that's actually something I've been thinking about a lot when I think about hyper casual specifically, and not the distribution model, but the content and the audience. For me, that's the really interesting piece here when we're talking about the L1s, because for me, the sort of last bull market driver in 2021 was the L1 story, right? And now it's this: if we want 500 million joining, a billion joining, well, it's not just going to be based on ETH or Sol or Matic. They're just infrastructure, right? You need to build that application layer to reach end customers. And for me, that's what I think is the this interesting opportunity with the hyper casual is you have this very traditional but very large $1 billion application layer within the app stores. So I think that's definitely something that can be innovated around, is how you can harness that. You need to figure out some UI UX challenges, but basically something people love spending time with without adding like significant barriers, and how you can unlock that to potentially drive the next wave. Now, whether that is piggybacking on the existing L1s, whether it's going to be some of these L2 challengers, or whether, like you're thinking, Quinn, it's going to be some of these publishers behind the scenes, or, actually Web3 innovators building out their own infrastructure to dial into that. I think it's super exciting to see how this plays out.
It really is.
So I came into this discussion thinking that in 5 years we would have Web2 publishing for non-blockchain or non-Web3 related games, and Web3 publishing for games like Axie Infinity, that ecosystem, and games that PlayEmber builds. It kind of sounds like Web3 in your minds, and maybe I'm wrong, right? But it kind of sounds like you're saying that Web3 actually revolutionizes publishing as a business model and as an industry, or as a part of the industry. Is that fair and correct?
I totally think so. I think it just changes the economics of the system in such a strong way. And when you no longer need this like pure middleman, hey, I'm going to run all of your UA, manage your monetization, and take X% cut, it unlocks a lot of the economics of the game. And a large portion of that's able to go back to the developer. A large portion of that's able to go to the players themselves who are co-owners of your game's network. And a large portion of that is captured by the network itself as well. And maybe that's the blockchain that it's running on, or other people who are holding assets. And so I think that aspect is so revolutionary that we will see it seep into everything.
Yeah, I think in phase one, we're already seeing that classic sort of Web2 publishing model, which is the Web2 publishers striking up partnerships or even investing in the L1, and then maybe some broad ecosystem partnerships with like a Venly, a Stardust, and launching a fund or grants that effectively is the sort of Web2, pay to develop model, and then trying to make blockchain games in the same way that they know and is very familiar with them in terms of Web2 games, with some sort of, testing model to de-risk their investment. So that's what I'm seeing a lot in the classic Web2 space. But then in Web3, you've got some other companies, and one you and I have discussed, Nico, but like the Joyride team. When I see something like that to me is what, whether it's exactly that's the route I think Web3 publishing is going to go in, right? I think, building a platform, an SDK that within it has got, live ops, distribution, analytics, NFTs, marketplaces. For me, if I think about, like the tilting points, the Scopelys, the Omers, the Lion Studios, that if I had to think about like what would V1 of Web3 publishing look like, I definitely think, that's what feels very smart to me. I'm excited to see how that evolves.
Yeah, I think there's another interesting piece to this too, right? Because I think everything we've been discussing so far is very much around like this polished game studio side. And that's obviously really important, and probably where the biggest winners will be. But there's a flip side to this, which is this very community driven open ecosystem UGC side. And the example for me that's coming to mind is this Axie Builders program that we shipped maybe 6 months ago. And it's where we basically opened up the IP and have provided whitelisted access to build on Ronin Network to, I think it's 12 different community studios. And, they range from groups who have never shipped a game before to one of them is actually a really badass hyper casual studio that shipped, I won't say what, but they shipped, I think they did over 100 million downloads on one of their games with a major publisher. And so all of them are basically invited in and can use our full IP to build any game that they want. They're all pretty light. And have some type of economics built into it, and we're finding ways to support them in the building process. But that is like the other side of it, where we are, opening up and sharing our community and sharing our IP, and you wouldn't really see that necessarily in the traditional publishing world.
Quinn, are those are they mobile games, or they're like WebGL type builds?
All of them are, I believe, mobile first, but can be played on desktop as well.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So we're going to have to get all of them into the app stores at some point.
So for me, that's really interesting. So without turning into the host, so what, in terms of this Web3 distribution model, obviously you've got like Gabby leading the way with like YGG. So how do you see that with what you're doing? Because if I listen to you, it's almost like you are now building your own Web3 sort of, in the Web3 mindset, Web3 publishing model. And if you're doing that directly now, tapping into the billions of players in the App Store, in that model, where do you see the guilds fitting in terms of in that sort of mobile distribution model?
the guilds have the guild ecosystem has really changed a lot in a super powerful way, right? When we had this massive boom, it's super interesting. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but at one point, about 60% of our DAU were scholars. So think about how powerful that is, because that means for 60% of our players, Axie didn't actually do any major pushes, onboarding, buying these users, educating them, right, and retaining them. It was actually kind of the guilds who were doing it. That's the beauty, obviously, of being a platform. As guilds grow, we grow, and vice versa. Now, obviously, things have changed. And the guilds who are still really, really passionate and really driving are the ones who have shifted away from just being this play to earn kind of extractive model to actually how can we build within this ecosystem. And so I think the winning guilds going forward, we have some guilds who are doing actually SaaS work. We have guilds who are now focused on esports and content creation. We have guilds now who are actually wanting to shift more into this game creation work and work alongside these builders program games and be almost launch pads to some extent, mini intra community launch pads. And I think that's so important, because as you grow, it gets harder to scale that nice niche community feel, and guilds kind of support that. You
mentioned earlier, Quinn, that for you, the Mavis Hub, I keep saying Sky Mavis Hub. Anyway, the Mavis Hub is a key innovation, compared to what you were doing before. Could you elaborate a bit on that? What are the most important differences that made that light switch on in your head?
So Mavis Hub, it's actually great that we're talking about this, because there are some updates kind of coming through this soon, but it really is the kind of most centralized point for a lot of the touch points within our ecosystem. And it's what we load all of our games through, and it's kind of obviously accessible to all. It will soon have all of these builders program games in it as well. It will soon have any kind of Ronin third-party games on there also. But obviously, because it's our own platform, right? We're not kind of blocked by Apple or Google saying no, or any other kind of Web3 hurdles that might come up in the process.
And so, and by the way, if you guys want to run this conversation and keep chatting, please go ahead, because you know what the good questions are. I'm just here, trying to figure out what exactly you guys are talking about. So, in any case, I'd like to shift the conversation a bit more towards actually getting users on your platform. Quinn, can you tell us a bit more about how you're approaching that from the Sky Mavis side?
Yeah. So the way that I think about growth really at Axie is there's kind of four parts to it, right? It's our community, it's our content creators, it's this ecosystem projects, or really guilds, right? And then it's user acquisition. And so every day the conversation is, how can we further unlock each of those channels? So on the community side, we recently launched this Lunacy and Codes program, which is this really badass referral program where all the ref codes and ref rewards are actually coded into our marketplace smart contract, so that reward payouts occur immediately as soon as marketplace transactions occur. And we launched an Axie creators program as well. But the UA side is getting really interesting, just because it's completely unsolved in Web3, and it's been a headache for us, but a really fun headache, because it's such a puzzle. Maybe I'll pause before I dive too deep into the UA side, and maybe invite Jon to add in, and then I can add more afterwards.
Yeah, I think I think there's two ways to look at it, and I think part of the answer is freeing yourself from all these labels and definitions that, right, a Web3 game to date traditionally has been a WebGL type build, and it's not mobile, and anything Web2 is mobile. I think that the starting point here is just to remove that, and it's about where can we bring blockchain in to make gaming more fun? And one of our investors made this great point. He's like, look, if you can bring me a game that I would choose to play over and above an existing mobile game, that would really excite me. And then let's start talking about NFTs and tokens. So I think this is something we've been obsessing over, which is, okay, you've got these billions of players in the mobile store already, and we're talking a lot about hyper casual. So, we're not talking about AAA gamers here. We're not talking about RPG gamers, and we're talking about people that aren't going to play a game if you put a giant paywall in front of it, e.g. an NFT that costs $100, right? In hyper casual, that would just tank your business immediately. So I think that for me is kind of really exciting, and what a lot of these L1s are trying to figure out. And I love what Axie are doing, listening to it. I saw it at your insane Japanese ambassador at the conference in Okinawa was talking about the Builders program, but now you're talking about it. I think this is super cool about the way that you're approaching it for this mass casual audience. I think that's really cool. But I think there is a huge opportunity here because a lot of the really top ETH games, like Illuvian, the Laguna team, for example, I think a lot of what's coming is these more, casual, skill-based PvP games. So I think for hyper casual, there's definitely an opportunity for someone to figure out, okay, there's this billion-dollar audience here. How can we just, without them even knowing, bring them and onboard them into Web3, right? And that's essentially what we've been sort of quietly using our knowledge and building out. But then the challenge there is how do you basically, obviously for the players, if you think about that classic hyper casual model, there's no community in it, right? You can make the experience more easier and more fun in terms of interoperability. But this sort of community element, Quinn, this for hyper casual games, you just ship a game and bar the usual comment in the App Store about there's too many ads. You don't have this Discord channel about like, hey guys, like when game, like when's update, when's the next skin coming, like every day, right? You just
and the multiplayer is fake multiplayer anyway.
Oh so. Yeah, the AI.
Right.
So I definitely think there's a huge challenge, but I think the investor challenge when it comes to hyper casual is typically they, in Web 2, they can't compete with, like look at Triple Dot's recent valuation. They don't have the LTVs of those kind of players. But I think this is where Web3 for me is really interesting is this isn't about gaming, right? I think it's how can you unlock this hyper casual audience to power this whole community-led, brand-led, PFP-led, loyalty-led, like next wave of Web3 businesses. Because that for me is a perfect fit, right? You look at like 50% of hyper casual ads and they are not for hyper casual games, right? They are for, other like brands and commerce and products. So I think I'm really excited to see, that evolution of hyper casual games into Web3.
Jon, what are some of the hardest parts, some of the biggest challenges as you think about bringing normies right into a Web3 game?
So I think, so one of the biggest challenges is just the whole crypto piece, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. All of this right now is a thesis. Like I'll be able to give you, if you ask me in a month, I'll actually have some answers for you. But I think this is what we don't know, right? I think what we do know and have to assume is that, some of the current onboarding in terms of like having to, have two different tokens, bridge ETH mainnet, right? That's just a huge step too far. I think there's just a lot of negativity around if people have heard of crypto, it's not a positive experience for them. And I think you made the point earlier. I think it's this assumption that, play and earn fits into this assumption, right? You and I have spent a lot of time with these players. Well, there's some pretty proven Web2 business models that actually tell us what they are happy to do in game in terms of, like reward, like misplay, for example, like rewards-based gaming. So I think the major barriers that need to be removed is this NFT pricing issue. I think making it very, very easy to sign up and become a Web3 player without even knowing it. And there's a whole other topic of conversation around the wallet onboarding and security issues related to that, to try and make that as simple as possible, given obviously the recent Solana news. But I think that's definitely a key part of it. And I think the other challenge is then, certainly with Web3, is making sure the sort of metagame that sits on top of that, the sort of motivations are really simple but compelling to drive the user behavior that ultimately the studio or the people accruing value behind it, so in Web3, the community, is going to sustain it, right? Because if that motivation is not enough, then why go and leave the games they love playing every day for this other game that kind of looks the same, but there's no real extra value for me playing it in terms of me personally as a player. And there's this, huge $100 IAP I've got to make to play the game. So I think that's a sort of summary of how I see what some of the current blockers are if you just try and smash Web3 on top of hyper casual.
Yeah. Nico, I think you and I even spoke about some of this before, right? Like you can no longer just kind of do like DeFi protocol with a game wrapper on it. You got to go back to the roots of having a fun and sticky core gameplay first and foremost. And then, token mechanics and an open economy are just kind of some really nice sprinkles on top. But Jon, awesome points. I actually kind of have a couple thoughts here in response. I think we're at a really tough time right now where all of us in the space kind of see the inevitability of this really awesome future that's being powered by blockchain, right? But most people are scared of it, and like it makes me think of like when email first rolled around. I think like your average mom who today plays Candy Crush probably back then was like, oh, I don't want to figure it out. Like that's just, let me get my son to help me. And then it reached this critical mass where like everybody had to figure it out, and you got into it and it turned out to not really be that scary, and I think we're kind of just chasing that moment right now, and it'll definitely come probably sooner than most of us really are ready for. But in the meantime, right, or even probably after, having this free to play on ramp, I think, into most NFT games, especially in mobile, especially kind of in hyper casual, I think is super critical. That's a theory we're testing right now with Axie Infinity Origin, which is the latest kind of revamp of Axie that we're pushing here. So far, we're seeing a lot of power in that. Actually, what's beautiful is it lets us capture users, in a way that they're already super comfortable. Right, go to the App Store, click download. Everybody can do that. Once we have them already, in my head, this is actually what we're going to be testing really, really powerfully here, probably kickoff of Q4. Does it then just turn into a CRM problem, right? Once we have them already, can we optimize through every touch point possible, basically a curriculum to help them convert into being blockchain gamers, into being NFT gamers, NFT owners at that point, right? Because ultimately we're going to capture them as unregistered free players. Then we're spinning up this conversion rate optimization team that's going to be focused on, okay, free to registered and then registered to blockchain. And I think it's going to be super grindy to figure it out, like just old school A/B testing. But I think that there's an answer there.
And I think the other thing, Quinn, and again, I love how you think is, I think a couple of things. One, you've got the perfect IP for it, for these mass casual games, right? It's something that wouldn't look out of place in a hyper casual game. But I'd love to know what you're thinking then around, because the other piece I see is then for just like Web2 games, the different profiles of players you've got. Some will love playing the original sort of like gamified staking version. But as you grow your portfolio, how you're starting to think about creating different content and different games to then start moving people around, and then almost a meta game around that as the motivation to start interacting with like different games in your portfolio. So I guess my bigger question is ultimately, if we go forward 3 years, do you see almost like this giant like Axie arcade, right, where you've got this portfolio of like, almost like your own app store, right? You've got, 200 games in there, like across hyper casual, idle, merge, like PvP, skill based, that you're powering. How do you see it?
Yeah, that's such a wild question, right? And the reason why is because we actually sat down and did like a really deep analysis on this a while ago now, maybe like 9 months ago. And we identified like 13 personas in our ecosystem. Why? Because maybe 6 of them actually play the game. But we have like hardcore community members who are nothing but like rare asset holders, or nothing but like participating in our DAO governance discussions every day. They never touch the game. Are they any less a community member than someone who only games? No. Maybe they're even more involved in a way, right? And so that's where Web3 gets super weird, because it's not just gamers who are persona community members, all of a sudden. And so figuring out how to keep all of them involved is a lot to juggle. And it goes beyond like the traditional approaches. But when it comes to just the gaming personas themselves, I think the answer is yes. Like we definitely have this vision of having a much greater ecosystem, a large portion of which is also Axie IP, like for instance, the Builders Program games we discussed, and a large portion of which is also like entirely third-party IP. But finding ways that, as we select some of these games that we build alongside, it's very important to us to make sure that it's a match for our current kind of player archetypes. We're actually in the process of onboarding this like really badass kind of psychological analysis, behavioral analysis tool called Solstin. It used to be called 12 Traits. Now it's called Solstin. And they're going to basically help us identify, what games our current players are most into, what kind of genres and types, to help us really pick the best fits for ones going forward.
That's super cool. I love that. And it's, I think it also feeds into another thought I've been having in this challenge, where I see all these like PFP collections, and it's like, okay, this particularly on ETH, where you kind of feel that people there are so passionate about the identity and the brand and the merchandise. And it's just like, it almost feels a bit lazy that, we should make a game. And it's something I'm waiting to see as these games roll out, is what is the actual fit between and I see them making like hardcore games, and I look at their PFPs, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I might be wrong. I mean, I don't know him personally, but like, Justin Bieber, does he want to sit and play a AAA game, right? And I'm also wondering, like, it's not a huge audience here, so I'm also interested to see how that evolves, because I feel some of these PFPs should stick to being like a Web3 brand, right? And explore that broader entertainment space, and I think leave gaming to companies like yourselves or the established studios. I'm really interested to see how that pans out. But the way you're thinking with all these, it goes back to my agency days. You've got these like 13 different audience personas, and you're basically building content and experiences for them, like you said, whether that is gaming, whether it's entertainment, whether it's just merchandise. I think is really cool.
Jon, it's a really cool point around the like 10K PFP projects, right? And I think there's definitely this kind of fashion to build a game, and I think a lot of that may have even been more well timed with the X2 earn kind of wave of things, and so it just became a really another powerful mechanism for rewarding your current token holders, right? Like staking. Okay, you got staking, now go build a game and distribute more tokens. I'm actually curious, have we seen any PFP projects launch a major kind of not hit, but too early for that, but even really successfully launch a big game yet? I mean,
it depends. I mean, it depends how loosely you define like PFP. Like for me, like if I look at crypto unicorns, like I know it's a game, but like also like there's some people that were just buying that because they love unicorns, right? And I discovered this phrase, these like crypto bros, these unicorn bros that love My Little Pony, that were all buying crypto unicorns, right? They weren't buying it because a game, but you've got like a legit, like Aaron and the Laguna team behind that project, and they're now spinning off some more games. I know that's a really tenuous link because ultimately it is a game, but yeah,
no, it's a great point.
But your point is, if you look at the classic PFPs, from my knowledge, I don't know, Nico, if you know any, but I'm struggling to think of one.
And I don't want to bash any, right? So I want to be clear. It was more of a question and not a slanted opinion, I think.
Yeah, but everyone's figuring it out, right? Sure like one of the Solana projects that I've been in for a while, just as a holder, like Soul Gods. They've now made this huge pivot. Like the CEO's moved to Lisbon, and they're now building out this big entertainment company. But as part of it, they are moving into this like gaming experience, and he's been really open on Discord and to communicate about some of the challenges of making that transition from being a really early like Solana PFP collection to trying to build a gaming company, right? And I love that honesty, right? Because it's just not easy, right? We've all been there on the gaming side, and it to build up, building out live ops is something that is not easy to do. But yeah, that's what I love about this space, is that everyone is it's that startup mentality. You've got a couple of theses, like run lots of little experiments and see which one catches fire. And I think that's what's exciting about Web3 is everyone is thinking like that and moving so fast that you have, we've all said it before, like a week in Web3 is like what, I don't know, 3 months in Web2. It's crazy.
It really is. I've been speaking with the CRM platform about kind of signing an agreement, and their original pitch was a 4-year deal, and I just in NFT land, that's an eternity. And so I think helping people understand that's key.
One thing, Quinn, the CRM thing again, I think is really interesting about where I think Web3 from a marketing and distribution point can solve some big Web2 problems. Is this question about like audience profiles that ATT made a lot harder, right, in terms of people having to opt in and ad targeting, whereas in Web3 when you have people signing up, and if you're building this whole CRM engine behind it, collecting all this data from I think the wallet is going to be is going to definitely be the next battleground. But I see that as a really interesting piece around Web3 marketing and distribution moving forward. Again, you can actually build up some really rich, like compliant audience profiles to deliver amazing, not necessarily advertising, but amazing experiences for your players and consumers that increasingly is becoming a challenge in Web2, and people are almost trying to gamify and hack the App Store and Google rules to just get around these permissions. So for me, I also think that's a really interesting area when we talk about UA and growth in Web3, that I can see some people building.
Yeah. And so I think it's super interesting point that needs to be solved, right? And there's people working on it. Like I've just found out in the last couple of weeks. That's what's incredibly exciting. I actually just had coffee yesterday with someone from a major Web2 hyper-casual publisher. And they're now working on basically the ability to create like really powerful personas using wallet data. And then use those personas to target kind of the uninitiated, like Web2 traditional gamers, and acquire them into Web3 that way by like, basically finding what's going to be the best fit. Super interesting. And I think I actually just got us into a beta for that, which I'm pumped to test that out. But the other piece of this as well is like even attribution platforms don't really work that well in Web3. We onboarded one and realized it was only going to do about 60% of what we needed it to do. And so actually had to onboard a second attribution platform to fill that remaining 40%. And now have two attribution platforms kind of working together in kind of a hacky way, but it's going to work, because we have to track people across mobile, across desktop, across our web-based marketplace. We have to pull in blockchain data, real-time transaction data that's not even denominated in like a currency that makes sense to an attribution platform. And so like it's super messy.
I love this, by the way. I'm supposed to be a facilitator of discussion, and if I don't have to do anything, I'm just sitting here and trying to figure out what you guys are talking about and absorbing the knowledge and insights. Jon, I'd like to get your learnings. So you've been operating within the Web3 space for a bit. I think people that listen to this might be, CMOs at a Web2 firm. What are some of the skills that you've needed to learn in order to, be successful in this space?
So I think first of all, community. It's just this word that is bounded around. But if you are even considering it, get involved in some like Web3 PFP collections, games collections, and hang out in the community and understand what community really means, right? Because it's not, people just say, oh yeah, community, build a community, but what does that actually mean? And some of these discords are just wild, right? But particularly the ones that you really want to get enchanted by and understand how they do it are the ones where there's no mention about floor price, right? It's just people that are just there for the community, for the game, just constantly giving sort of feedback. And it's just quite overwhelming, right? I'm in one of them on Solana, and it's just amazing. I feel like I know these people. Like it's like the remnants. It's like a just really, really like sort of hardcore idle looting game, but the community there is just insane. So I definitely think this community piece is something you shouldn't underestimate and just assume because you've got a social media team in Web2. Oh yeah, they can do this in Web3. It's fine. Like everything is different. Like you started the podcast, Nico, like GM, right? Great example. Like no one talks like that in Web2, right? So I think definitely that is one of the key things. The second thing that we've covered is the speed at which you have to move. You do not have that luxury in Web3 to have a team meeting, another team meeting, a smaller team meeting, like meeting with your. You just don't. You have to figure this stuff out relatively quickly. I think the third thing linked to that point that I guess you get used to in Web 2, but in Web 3 you have to be. You're going to fail a lot more, and you just need to get super comfortable with that because there are really no rules, right? Whereas in Web 2 gaming, the three of us were like, as we've discussed, yeah, that's kind of how you do it. That's the business model that works. Here's the reference points, here are the metrics. In Web 3, no one knows, right? But there's the opportunity, right? There are some people that kind of know and are testing loads of stuff, and that's the mindset that you've got to have. And I think that's the challenge I've seen from some people as they come into Web3 with this, I want to say ego from Web2, like, oh, I've done this stuff and whatever. And that's amazing. That's great and an incredible achievement. But I think Web3, you just have to be humble. It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, just learn, like treat people with respect, and your curve of learning is going to be amazing if that is your mindset. But I think unfortunately, if you don't embrace sort of Web3 and yeah, you bring any sense of ego into it, then it's going to be a bit bumpy.
Yeah, that failure part's so key, right? Like failure is not only part of the development process, but public failure is part of the development process, because everything we do, we have to build in public, right?
Yeah.
And there's a super interesting point around why community is so powerful in Web3. Because the truth is that community in Web3, each community member is 10x more passionate. And that's on both sides, right? That's on the upside and the downside of it. Why? It's because they're really not just community members. And this is something that all of us kind of intuitively get, even though we don't say it. But the truth is they're your co-owners. They're the co-owners of your network, right? And the way I always like to think about it is like in Web2, when you ship a new project, your first goal is really to like capture your first 1 million paying users. In Web3, your first goal is to onboard your first 10,000 co-owners of your network. And that's why we see like these 10K PFP projects, and the ones that kind of hit that point are able to roll forwards, and the ones that don't quite capture that mass kind of don't, right? But it turns into like this very powerful hand-holding process of onboarding those first 10,000 co-owners. But once they're on, man, like they're your evangelists, and they turn into your whales, and they're the ones who are grinding on the Discord every day, and they're the ones who feel like your family, even though you've never met them in physical.
But then, just like you've done, Quinn, right? Then they actually become your ambassadors, right? Like having seen some of them on stage and tell their story, they just started out as players, right, and just progressed. And I think that's the amazing thing about building teams in Web3 is that just acknowledging some of your key hires are going to come from that early community, right? And that's great. And the reason why you hire them is they've already got that network and they just understand Web3. So
it's a great point.
Yeah, and again, I think you're, something I've been studying and looking at Axie to really understand this in Web3, because your earlier point, man, that the passion and some of these videos for like your big conference coming up in Barcelona are just insane. It's just people love Axie. It's just nuts.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's really cool. But again, I think that's just one of the key learnings. Like I think you need to study like all of the big games, and I know there is this barrier, but you need to play them, join these communities, and once you start figuring this stuff out, it's just okay. What is my version of that? You mustn't forget the importance of brand. That again, you don't have to think of in Web 2. You think about your brand in a B2B sense. If we're talking about hyper casual publishing, right? Your brand is important to investors and game studios, but you don't have to worry about consumers. Whereas in Web 3, as a games company, your brand is super important, right? Not just obviously the game itself, but your brand and the like Axie, just the power and the passion behind that. That's what people are looking for, and they, you can smell it and taste it in the Discord, and that's not something you can just whip up or just release a bot army on, right?
No. And what's so unique about it is like it's not curated. The brand is so organic, and really the community is kind of what actually creates and molds and pushes the brand forward and gives it its own soul in the first place. I think I owe you guys a name. Antonio Garcia Martinez is the guy I'm speaking with, who's building a Web3 attribution platform. Antonio GM on Twitter. I won't plug him too hard, as I haven't actually had a talk with him yet, but that's coming next week. Also, I have kind of an interesting example around community and building in public and how you have to involve them, right? So we recently shipped this Axie Creator Program, maybe 2 months ago now, and it's actually the second iteration of it. The first iteration was shipped back in February, I believe, and was killed 24 hours later. And what happened was we needed to build some better structure around our creators, retain them, and help them participate in the value that they were bringing. And so Jiho and I actually went and did a whole bunch of really badass Web2 creator program benchmarking. And we spoke to people at Supercell. We even spoke to Fwiz he was still at YouTube Gaming at the time, right? And we spoke to Epic about how they structure theirs. And we built honestly, it was a really elegant creator program, and had ways. One thing that they kept telling us was you gotta pay your creators. It doesn't sound great, but ultimately your top creators, you gotta pay them money, and other ones you have to give them a way to see a path to making money in what they do. And so I was okay, how do we figure that out? And we ultimately decided to kind of add 1% to our marketplace fee at the time to kind of fund this referral code program that only creators could access. And we built all this quietly, and then one day just wrote a Substack and shipped it. And I'll never forget, 30 minutes later, there was this Twitter space spun up with 78 of our top creators, and they were furious. And I had to get in there, right? And for an hour and a half, I basically just kind of let them vent because they had a lot of emotions. But what I learned that day was two things. one, nobody likes to be taxed, and that makes a lot of sense. But two, nobody likes to be surprised. And it was the fact that we built all of this for our creators without ever, because our creators are also some of our largest asset owners. We built all this for them without even ever consulting them about it. And as I look back on that, I'm like, how could we be so stupid? But I was taking this very Web2 approach, right? If you're building something for your consumers, like maybe you'll do a little bit of a survey to see how, like, you know, what their interests are, but you're not actually going to like invite them into the development process. And this was just this powerful learning for me that like, oh shit, these guys are so passionate and they deserve to be behind the curtain in everything that we do. So we went back to the drawing board. We did like 160 hours of creator one-on-ones with all of like the biggest creators in our ecosystem. Ended up learning we had to like even redefine what it means to be a creator. Because in Web3, like, you know, somebody creating community tooling a dev creating community tools is a content creator. And like, that's not in Web2. And ended up shipping it alongside the community. And, you know, I think right now we have a CRM with over 400 Web3 content creators in it. And I'm pretty confident that's got to be the single largest Web3 content creator CRM in existence. So building alongside the community was the biggest learning coming from that.
That's amazing. The thing I'm taking from this is like everyone actually always gets wheeled out as like the bastion of Web3 games. The thing I'm taking for this is we need to get you on stage at the next wave about building like Web3, this marketing machine. I think that's the story that is not being told at these events, right? It's how you've got there. That's what I find fascinating. So yeah, I'm hoping we'll see you at more of these conferences, because I think this is just such a great conversation to be having, because everyone is focusing on the outcomes of, you know, IDOs and NFT sales and a lot of the noise around the battle of the L1. You know, some of the things that are going to be figured out here in terms of CRM attribution, you know, we've not even touched on like the opportunities in terms of advertising, like innovation when it comes to ad formats. Like I know right. We hate them, but there's just some super cool stuff that's going to be done there. You know, it made me cry inside a little bit. I love the idea, but when Coca-Cola did that launch on Polygon and everyone was shouting about it, I think again the intention was amazing. But I'm like, oh, you could have done something really, really cool there if you wanted to. But yeah, Is new routes of monetization, is that something that you guys have started to think? Because for us, it's in our roadmap, but we haven't actually been able to put any thought towards it. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my background, is like agency ad tech side. And that's something I've been obsessing over, which is, you know, in hyper casual, there's only so many rewarded videos you can put in a game, right? And I think hyper casual, the meta of hyper casual is getting better, right? I think Rollic in particular, for me, with the Zynga acquisition, I think the layer of complexity they're adding and bringing, you know, 3-button upgrades into hyper casual is kind of cool. That gives you more flexibility to do that. But yeah, I definitely think blockchain technology, you know, is a blank piece of paper. You know, you should be trying loads and loads of stuff. So something we're going to be testing is, okay, loot boxes, the gacha mechanic, right? People know that, right? It's already in loads of mobile games. Wouldn't it be cool if you could hide like loads of Axies in these gacha loot boxes in mobile games, right? Wow. And then you could just have this crazy competition of it's in the community, and there you go, right? Of course, there's some infrastructure behind that, but there you go. There's your Web2, Web3 bridge right there. And I think it's just, again, I've had to go through this process of just forgetting everything I know in Web2, learning Web3, and then trying to come Web3 into Web2. But I think there's a lot of innovation that can be had now in terms of even what the concept of advertising means, rather than just shoving an ad on a screen. Right, because I think we're all a bit tired of that. So that's this ecosystem that I can see growing up and have been trying to draw, which is, okay, how does this all fit together? You know, like OpenSea, Fractal, like the blockchain games. What does this Web3, and app stores are the wrong word, but this just like, you know, like the eBay of like Web3, this marketplace where, you know, it's just super easy and seamless, no matter what token you've got to like trade, upgrade, whatever you want, right? How does that all fit in, and how does advertising fit into it? And I think, yeah, there's so many interesting parts in this that need to come together, like the CRM, the attribution, the cross-chain piece. And again, that's why we're here, right? We will all do it together, versus Web2 is like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to build this giant moat, and I'm going to bring everything in.
And you go like this and try to keep other people out.
I'm going to have my own attribution, my own creative tools, my own content. And that's the thing that I think is really exciting about Web3 is, there are these amazing ad stacks and multi-billion-dollar businesses, and we've all seen the whole high-profile sort of news a couple of days ago and proposed takeover that's going to happen in Web2. But the thing is in Web3, and I think this is the sense that, we keep talking about, is rising now, that there were some people skirting around it in these Web2 business models around identity, and people really wanted monetizing it. And I think this is what Web3 is going to unleash in people, that I think some Web2 companies don't understand. They don't own the person, right? Those ad tech companies, you are just the sum of each of those individual people, right? And if you can, and like take Axie, like, hey, this is way more fun. I just want to go spend my time here. And you've built this CRM machine and thinking that whose goal is to derive value to those people. That's really exciting. And that has to win versus Web2. It's not about driving value to someone. It's how I can get the most value out of you as a user to drive my machine. And I think for me, that's why I'm so excited about, that's one of the key tenets of Web3, that, listening to you in particular, Axie, and some other big builders, that's what they care about. And that's going to win, right? People are going to leave these Web2 walled gardens that don't own them, but these walled gardens think they do own them, right? And I think that's super cool.
This is why I know, right? Web3 is inevitable, because the value capture mechanisms and the value distribution mechanisms in Web2 are 10x more superior to what we see in Web2. In Web3 are more superior to Web2, right? In Web2, nobody's time is valuable to themselves. It's only valuable to the dev who launched the game. In Web3, and especially at Axie, we truly believe everybody's time is valuable. And because of that, you should get to participate in the value that you help create, right? Like this super boiled down example I love to think about it through is like a restaurant. Okay. If you're sitting at a restaurant and you're eating there, traditionally in our Web2 head, you're a customer and you're paying. The truth is, though, just by you being there, you're adding value to that restaurant, because somebody walking by, nobody wants to go into a dead restaurant. But if you're in the restaurant and you're having a good time and you're smiling and chatting with your friends, you're adding value to the atmosphere of that restaurant and helping the acquisition of new customers into that restaurant. Now, if that restaurant was a DAO and you held some of the tokens controlling that restaurant, you were you participated in governance of that restaurant, the token value would be increasing by the value you add to that ecosystem, and therefore you would be participating in the value that you help create. And it's so simple in Web3. We just never had this technology before in Web2.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. But I think also with that is, coming to this hyper casual, that's the education piece, because you're saying a DAO, like all of us are like, hey, that's super cool. And, Nico, what you're doing with your DAO is, we get that. It's not like you have to explain to us what a DAO is, but I think that's going to be part of this on ramp. There isn't just the technical side. It's just helping, just find a really friendly way that doesn't feel like this big identity privacy thing, that can clearly communicate the benefits of this DAO and governance to mass consumers, because I think that's also a challenge right now. I was in a focus group last week on this, and they were like, what do you think a DAO is? And you just get some hilarious answers like it's a cheese, it's a yogurt, whereas we're talking in acronyms. So I think also this is part of the challenge, is just assume your audience, this is all alien to them. They just want to have fun. How can you enable that without all these acronyms in the background? So I think that's also a real challenge for us, right?
Well, it also raises a really beautiful point too, because at the end of the day, you're right. We shouldn't even be using that terminology, especially when we're onboarding new people, because ultimately, if you're selling a house, are you ever going to talk about the hammer and the tools that you use to build that house? No, you're going to sell the roof over your head, the security, wonderful moments with your family. So ultimately, as we're selling NFT games and onboarding new users, we should just be selling the gaming.
Did you miss Rialto out in your introduction in terms of your your background, the way you just sold me a house? I'm like, man, I want to live in that house. You just reeled that off.
I love it. Maybe that's an alternate career. Yeah. But yeah, right. I think ultimately we rely so much on the tools because to us, we're in it and the tooling is unbelievable. But your average normie is going to have no interest in the tools, and that's fine, because we can still sell them a really wonderful experience without them.
And I think that's one of the questions you asked me. I think that still is one of the challenges right now, that I think Google and Apple need to join the party a little bit now and help us out here, because they for me, they're only going to benefit, right? There is a huge amount of extra value that they can capture here. But perhaps that's wrong, right? Perhaps that's wrong in thinking that these $1 billion Web2 infrastructure, media, gaming companies are just suddenly going to switch on to Web3. And maybe it's wrong to think that, but I think that is still part of the challenge, right? For these non-crypto natives and perhaps the ones that index really well with the current sort of blockchain games and, like the Shrapnels of the world, like Time Raiders, those kind of games that I don't think are a big barrier for that overlap between crypto natives and gamers. But I think, for these mass consumers, there is definitely a technical infrastructure problem right now that, we can create all we want, but we could get there a lot faster if Apple and Google would just, join the party and have a very open conversation and be part of this. And they are. I don't want to say like that they're not. There are, there are already games in the App Store with like Web3 wallets in. It's starting to happen. I just hope it's now going to start happen a lot faster.
Yeah, Google is getting a lot more comfortable with it than Apple is. Everything that's on the App Store right now isn't necessarily in line with policy, but obviously it's very easy to slip by on both App Stores, right? Google, I've had a lot of really interesting conversations with them, and what's cool is a lot of their people are so crazy interested in Web3. I actually just did a fireside chat with their leadership team for their APAC ads business in Singapore 2 weeks ago. And there were about 40 people in there. It was supposed to be like 45 minutes and it went an hour and a half because the Q&A just wouldn't stop. And they were asking the most educated questions. A lot of them are in the space and super interested, which is a huge sign, right? But the truth is that like right now, Web3 and NFT apps specifically probably represent less than 1% of Google's current revenue opportunity. So that slows it down a little bit for their leadership to get on board, but they're talking about it, and that's what matters. And then the other part too is they're very scared, right? Because Google's largest asset right now is probably their client relationship. Like they are a trusted mobile app distribution platform. There's really only two very well trusted distribution platforms, and they're one of them, right? And they're actually larger in terms of users. And they look at what's going on in the NFT space and they read headlines about rug pulls and stable coin crashes. And they have this fear that there's not an adult in the room. And all of us in here, like we're in here for the right reasons. We know that most people are, but they can't see that yet. And so I've had a number of conversations helping educate them and getting them around to it. And I actually just got a verbal green light for Axie Infinity Origin to be live on Play Store. The only part that we'll be missing will be our earning mechanics. But when we first started conversations with them, they told us we couldn't even hook up to a blockchain. We couldn't even integrate NFTs into the gameplay. And we got them to move on both of those. So I'm excited. I think we'll actually be the first NFT game that Google is officially allowing onto Play Store. We're just waiting for that to be official now.
That's amazing. When's the movie coming?
I don't know, man. Soon, maybe soon.
Dude, Netflix documentary confirmed 100%. All right, guys, we're running over time here. My audience, listeners are going to be angry. I'm trying to keep these shorter, but the conversation went well. It was I didn't have to do much. It was amazing. So thanks for that. Last question for you guys: where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you, what you're doing, and where do you spread out, the crypto bro knowledge?
John?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, like at Jon Hook. If you want to go Web2, LinkedIn. The two obvious places to find people, I think, and that's really interesting now that it's all about your Twitter profile on Web3. Forget LinkedIn, right? But yeah, those are the two for me.
Mm-hmm. You, Quinn?
Yeah, awesome. I'm smooch_Axie on Twitter. And actually we'll be spinning up a TikTok here somewhat soon. So look out for that in the Twitter bio as well.
Fantastic. By the way, John, so you are going to be at Gamescom, correct?
Yeah, I'll be at Gamescom, yeah.
Okay, so this episode will come out, I think, the week before Gamescom. Okay,
so
I'm going to be there too.
Amazing.
So you and me are going to hang out. Quinn, are you going to be there, or are you going to be in Spain, or?
I won't, unfortunately. Yeah.
Are you just staying Vietnam? You are.
I'm in Vietnam now. When is Gamescom actually?
It's in 2 weeks from now. So
okay,
it's on the 20.
I'll be there for AxieCon right afterwards in Barcelona.
September. September. Yeah, good. All right. So if you want to, hang out with John and you're in Cologne in 2 weeks, or like next week when this comes out, let us know. That was it. This was a fantastic episode. This was great. Thanks, Quinn. Thanks, John. Really enjoyed this, and also really enjoyed just being able to listen, not having to think, okay, I have to ask a smart question in a minute. Anyway, so this was great. Listener, I hope you enjoyed this too. If you did, feel free to let us know and give us a good rating in wherever you're listening or watching this. And with that, we are out, and we look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Ciao.